Item: SCP-603. Object Class: Safe. Special Containment Procedures. As of the 12th of November 2006, SCP-603 is stored on a dedicated computer system in Laboratories 12A, Observation Room 1. The system may be accessed remotely via Foundation intranet. Personnel wishing to access SCP-603 must apply for a temporary password to allow them access to the system. A standard SCP-603 password will expire 24 hours after being issued. If access to SCP-603 for longer than 24 hours is required, please contact Dr. Brown. Physical access to Observation Room 1 without direct authorization from Dr. Brown is prohibited. SCP-603 should never be left to run unattended. Description: SCP-603 is a self-replicating computer program capable of reproducing and extending its own source code. The first version of SCP-603 was written in 1996 by a graduate of university's personal computer was seized by the Foundation in 1997 following an investigation into multiple anomalous occurrences. In a 2003 interview, claimed that the original source code for SCP-603 consisted of approximately 12,000 lines of ANSI ISO. This claim has not been verified. On startup, SCP-603 begins generating new versions of its source code in a separate thread of execution. SCP-603 does not modify itself in memory. Instead, it keeps an internal copy of the source code which is modified iteratively. On a clean termination of SCP-603, the entire source code will be output to the working directory in a new directory named source. In addition to modifications to the internal and external functionality of the program, alterations and additions to the semantics and structure of the language are made with each iteration. Due to its continuously changing nature, the language has been nicknamed Morphic. When passed a list of source files, SCP-603 acts as a compiler and linker. Morphic code is always compilable by the version of SCP-603 by which it is output. However, older versions of the program can rarely compile code output by newer versions. On compilation, the program is output to an executable file named Megaprime. Recent versions of the SCP-603 source code consist of approximately 70 million lines of heavily obfuscated Morphic. SCP-603 builds are archived on the latest builders. For information on building SCP-603, see document. When left to run uninterrupted, SCP-603 will generate prime numbers increasing from 2 and print them to the environment's standard output. Upon hitting a superprime, there is a chance that a GPU accelerated window will open. The contents of this window are varying. This process is deterministic. The same version of SCP-603 will always open a window at the same superprime and display the same scene. If the scene accepts any form of input from the user, entering identical input on separate executions will give the same result. Most scenes are accessible from only a single version of the program. However, some scenes persist through multiple compilations, often with variations. It is common for persistent scenes to evolve with each version of SCP-603, though some, such as Die, have remained unchanging since their first iteration. The most prominently recurring SCP-603 scenes are documented below. Other recorded scenes are documented in the supplementary file 603 FT 2012.